Andre Lira, aka Dr. Jeep.
That's correct.
Thank you for talking to me today.
Thank you.
I always like to start off talking about childhood. It's the foundation of all of us,
Yep.
how we get to be where we're at. So tell me about you growing up.
Sure. So I was born to two Brazilian parents. They came to America from Brazil in the 1980s to get their PhDs at the University of California at San Diego. And then they moved to New Jersey about in the late 80s, and I was born there in 1990. Grew up in a town called Westfield, which is a very like white, waspy town, not much to do there. And around the time I was 8, I moved to the town I finished my childhood at called Chatham. And in Chatham, lived in a pretty like standard like, white picket fence town. Was kind of like a weirdo in school, honestly. Like I got to school and I remember one of my earliest memories was like me being like maybe the second or third day of school in my new town, third grade. And we had gym class and like there was like a exercise where you had to like kind of run around the gym just as like warm up. And I sprinted the full thing, just like at full speed. And everyone's like, who the hell is this kid? Like, why is he running so fast? And that should have been an early indicator of my ADHD, but it wasn't diagnosed until many years later. But yeah, I mean, I was, moved to a new town, had like no friends, made a few via kind of like, typical nerd stuff like gaming and stuff like that. Was really big into video games back then. Not so much now, just don't have time for it really, but I did really love playing games. And let's see. I eventually got into playing guitar when I was 8 and got into music from there, was terrible at it, but I discovered this program called Tabit, and basically what it was a program that played back guitar tabs, which is the way you like write guitar notation. So it's like the 6 strings with like numbers for the fret you're on. So the way you'd see it is like, 0, like, and the next string, like 2, next string 2, that'd be like a power chord on the E. And so it would play back to you in MIDI, but you could also write like drum tabs and bass tabs. So you can basically compose full songs in the software. And I used it to like learn how to play guitar, but eventually started like writing my own music in the software. There was a little like online community, there's like forum that like of people writing songs and uploading tabs and just like talking. And I was probably like 30-ish people on this forum, or 30 like regular users, and they're all, I would say like like American teenage boys from like the age of like 15 to like 25. Like the oldest person's probably like in his like mid 30s, but mostly just kind of like late teens. And yeah, that was like my kind of like online friend community that I just hung out with from the time I was like 13 until like 18. And while I was using the software, I eventually got like decent enough at it and started like writing like more interesting music. And when I was 14, I ended up writing this like really crazy, like super epic metal album, I guess, on it. I had a sort of incident in school that influenced it just got me in a very emotional state. And so I basically wrote this like crazy album over the course of a week, like during spring break. And it ended up winning like metal album of the year when I was like 14. But all these kids are also like my age, so it's not like, but they're all like really good musicians. So that was the kind of first indicator to me that like, all right, music is maybe something you should kind of try and pursue at some point in your life. And aside from that, I ran track and field and cross country, and I was obsessed with it. And I wasn't like amazing. I was like okay, I wasn't like really really good or anything, but I was so hell bent on it that I was like, I'm gonna choose my college based on running. And I was like looking at all these like small schools in the South for some reason, like Louisiana, like where could I run D3 track? So glad I didn't do that, okay, because like that would have changed my life path immensely. But eventually I ended up going to college in Boston at the school called Northeastern University. And I chose it because it had this interesting program where it was like 4 years of college and then 1 year in the middle of like these paid internships that they send you out on. And so what I studied was behavioral neuroscience, and because I was interested in, biology and psychology, I'm like, why not both? And I was just kind of interested in how the brain worked, and I had this like theory in my head because I was like, played like mostly like metal and metal adjacent music, but I also listened to like folk and like rap and like, Brazilian music. And I had a pretty wide taste in what I liked, but there were some kids in my school that like exclusively listened to like the Beatles and Jack Johnson. You know, that was a very classic, like the popular kids always listened to Dave Matthews Band, the Beatles, and Jack Johnson. Those three exclusively, no other music. And I was so curious of like, why is it that some people have this like ability or desire to like listen to like a lot of different varieties of music, and some people are just like, I'm gonna stick with this one thing and just like let it cook. And so I was going to college with this idea of like, let me try and study like, is there changes in your brain chemistry, or is it more of a cultural thing that like leads you to what kind of music you're into? And got to college, and yeah, being in Boston was very transformative in the sense that like, you know, first time living away from home and in like another major city where I came from like a suburb, and gave up the track and cross country immediately because it was very apparent that like I only really liked it because I was part of a team and we were good. And running solo was just like, wow, it's actually kind of boring. Like I don't really like this. And, you know, I discovered like weed and like pizza, and like I was like, okay, I don't have to like be so regimented in my life and like be laser focused on this athletic stuff. I want to like let loose and have fun a bit. Yeah, basically like one day I was like at this record shop and I discovered this CD that had a really cool cover, had a cool cover of like a bat on it. And I was like, actually, let me back up. The first exposure to electronic music, which is now my kind of primary artistic medium, was when I was the first exposure was like probably when I was like 11 or 12, when I got this little like toy dinky like DJ controller thing. And it came loaded with a bunch of tracks, and one of them was by this group Pendulum, which is like a big drum bass group from the UK. And it was my first exposure to like drum bass. I was like Pendulum and other kind of like random like neurofunk, like early 2000s like neurofunk kind of stuff. It was weird. I didn't really understand at the time, but it was similar enough to metal where I was like, okay, this is kind of cool. But then I remember when I was 16, my friend Dean Hennigan Stevenson, shout out Dean, he picked me up in his car and he was like, hey, I just got this CD from this band called Justice at Best Buy. Like, check it out. I think you might like it. And Justice, you know, incorporates a lot of kind of like rock type elements there. So it was something I naturally gravitated to. And then from there, I was like, all right, what else is in this kind of like French electronic music universe? And I discovered like Daft Punk and all the kind of like basic stuff like Ed Banger. But then flash forward a few years to college, and I went to this record store, I got the CD, and it ended up being the Fabric mix series by Caspa and Rusko, and it was my first exposure to dubstep, and that was like big game changer for me. Yeah, basically like from there, diving into like UK music and like discovering things like labels like Hessel Audio or Hemlock or like Hot Flush. I mean, all H labels for some reason. But getting into like UK music from there, and then as part of my degree, like, as I mentioned, there's like this year of like paid internships. And so there's two separate ones that we did. The first one I did was at this like lab at Northeastern that was the audiology lab. So what we were doing was basically like studying how human ear cells, or like the hairs in your ear, are like vibrating and attracted to like different sounds. And so we had this like soundproof booth. We'd go and play just at different frequencies, you know, kind of like ranging from like 20, 40, 80, whatever. And just like seeing how the hairs are vibrating and seeing like, are there certain frequencies that like, it's not triggering, and like trying to test like, are you deaf to certain frequencies? Like when you get tinnitus, for example, right? Like people that have tinnitus, myself included, like what they'll hear is like in total silence, you'll hear like a really high pitch, like very faintly. But that's like at the frequency that you've basically lost, because my understanding is that like it just kind of fries that like nerve receptor. So we did these, we were just doing these tests to kind of train this equipment. I don't know, this is like also like 15 years ago, so like my remembrance of this is a little bit less. But the second internship I did was in London at this lab that studied just music psychology as a whole. And I wanted to go to London specifically because like the music...
This is London, UK?
London, UK,
yeah,
yes.
Okay, sorry, continue.
I wanted to go there specifically because, the music I liked was from there. And this lab was doing really interesting research, primarily in this one field called earworms. And what an earworm is when you're like in the shower and you have a song stuck in your head and you just cannot get that loop out of your head no matter what you do. You're like, let's say, like, since you've been gone, and then you just keep doing that 8-bar loop over and over. And you're like, how do I get this thing out of my head? So we were studying like what causes earworms, and is there like a formula to like creating a song that might induce an earworm? So my job there was essentially like get the top 40 tracks of the year for the last like 50 years, and then transcribe them into MIDI in Ableton. Like just get that like chorus, that catchy part, and then like write out the notes like do 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 do. Export that file and have this like database of like 1,000 MIDI files that we can basically then mathematically like average into like what's the most common pattern you see. And that way, the idea was we would like sell these to like, advertising agencies to be like, oh, you want a jingle for your thing? Here's the scientifically proven most jingle-like melody. But while I was there, like going out and experiencing like UK club culture was like super eye-opening, and people party much harder out there, obviously, but also people like in general are really they just like know the music more because they grew up with it, right? Like there's people I met there that were like, I was at a house party one day before I went to Fabric for the first time, which was like a very amazing club back in the day. Maybe not so much now because there's different kind of like security regulations and it's just like a bit of a worse vibe there. But they met this guy at this party and he was like a folk musician. And he was a folk musician. And I was like, oh, it's interesting. Like, I wouldn't expect you to be going to like a nightclub. And he's like, why not? And I'm like, well, I know in the US, I feel like people that are into like band music usually stick to like band shows. They don't like go to like electronic music shows. He's like, I mean, yeah, I make folk music, but like my parents grew up listening to jungle. So like I have an appreciation for this kind of music. And yes, I will do like a pill at the club, even though like you wouldn't expect that from me. And I'm like, interesting. When did you start doing that? He's like, oh, I was like 14. I'm like, you were taking ecstasy at 14? He's like, yeah. I'm like, that's crazy. I didn't touch any drugs until I was like 18 or 19. So yeah, there's just a certain kind of cultural shift there where like people are getting exposed to like music, drugs, also drinking and stuff like at a much earlier age than in America. So by the time you're like in your early mid 20s, you're kind of like a seasoned raver. Whereas in America, it's like you might be going to your first like electronic music show period at 21 because that's when you're able to go to clubs, right? So yeah, that was really sick. And I was also DJing around the same time I started producing electronic music when I was like 16 or 17 probably, because I was writing like guitar music, for lack of a better term, until then. And I started off writing kind of like chiptune or like kind of like video game soundtracky stuff that you might hear in like Mega Man or like early Sonic the Hedgehogs. And then made some like kind of weird like trancey stuff, and then some like drum and bass adjacent material that even before I like properly listened to drum and bass, it just had the same kind of like beat pattern and speed. And I started DJing like freshman year in college, so probably like 3 years before I went on this trip to London. And yeah, it was just the kind of thing where I was like DJing at house parties, and playing with my friends. I had this collective called Banana Peel Records that was 4 dudes, me and another guy from the US. His name is Matt Rohr. He's happily married now with a baby. Crazy life change because he was a party animal back in the day, but love the guy. My other friend Zanny, who is from Switzerland, and my other friend Travis from Luxembourg. And it was funny because it was like the 2 American guys were really into like UK music, and then the 2 European guys were really into like tech house, basically. And so it was an interesting combo of like us playing music that was like more in the bass realm and more in the kind of like groovy techie realm, and like the 4 of us just playing together all the time. Like I got influence from them a lot. And of the 4 of us, like I was the only one who like put out productions like more commonly. Like everyone made music, but like I just like put it out publicly a bit more, and got to a point where I was getting shows like outside the city and getting flown out for shows, and it was super exciting at the time. And then graduated college, wanted nothing to do with neuroscience. Moved back to New York, and my parents, they got divorced when I was a senior in high school. So by this time, they were both in Manhattan. And I moved back in with my mom for like a few months. And I was trying to find a job, and I was like, I don't really want to work in neuroscience anymore. So what I'm going to do is just do some temp gigs. Like I had a friend that like worked at this temp agency. And I was doing just temp gigs of like random like courier stuff or like administrative assistant for like a day. And eventually the guy that ran the temp agency was like, hey, you seem like a reasonably smart guy. Do you want to become a recruiter? And I was like, sure, I need a job. And I found myself in the position of being a recruiter for this like finance and accounting company, which was so boring. um, it was just like all day talking to accountants, which are, probably really smart people, but like the ones I talked to were just dull as bricks. And it was all day just like reading resumes and talking to people. And in a universe, accounting and finance, I just didn't really care about. So pretty soul-sucking job. And I, after like a year and a half, left that job and had like no backup plan. But via some connections I made in New York, like ended up falling into working at this German creative agency called Yadastar, which did this project called Red Bull Music Academy, which for certain people in a certain generation was like a pretty like notable thing in the kind of culture. RBMA, what they were basically was like every year there'd be like a sort of conference where they would go to a city, invite 60 musicians from around the world, like young kind of like up-and-coming musicians, have them live in this like campus essentially, and every day they would get lectures from like really big people in the music world. Like Bjork did a lecture, Arcade Fire, like the producer on like Prince's records, like Mala, Ben UFO, like people that are like big in their respective scenes would come give lectures and talks about their life in a much more detailed and oriented fashion, kind of like to what I'm doing now. We also built these like custom music studios for them, but we would always build like 5 studios for 60 people. So you basically had to collaborate with the people. And you'd have situations where it'd be like, a drummer from Spain, a vocalist from South Africa, like a DJ from Japan. They would all come together and like make a track. And like the sort of cross-cultural pollination was really interesting, I think. And a lot of like pretty well-known people have come through this program, like Nina Kravitz, Flying Lotus, like Lunas, I think, like Hudson Mohawk, like people that are like quite big now have gone through this program and kind of like established the benefits from it. And it was an amazing job. I basically was like a project manager for their international radio activations. We had this like 24/7 radio station, and we would go to like festivals and record sets from various artists, and also like host like interviews and stuff. So like my job was to like fly to the festival, set up this like physical radio booth, liaise with the kind of like local Red Bull team, like Red Bull Spain in the case of Sonar, or like Red Bull London, or Red Bull Germany or whatever. And we would like be hosting these stages at these festivals, and so we'd essentially like be asking the Red Bull contact, like, hey, in the contract, can you build in that like we can record your set and that we can interview you? And so I'd be talking to these people, and that was my job essentially. It was a really cool job, and I got to travel a lot. And because my company was based in Germany, I would go to Germany like every month essentially. So very back and forth, and really exciting time in my life. I really, really loved that job. But unfortunately in 2019, Red Bull had hired our agency for the past 20 years to do this thing, and we were like their in-house creative agency essentially, and they were basically like, we can just do this ourselves and save a bunch of money, so fuck y'all. They fired all of us, and our agency closed down, and I was like, oh man, my dream job like coming to an end. Like this is it was 3.5 years there, so it was a great time, but I was like, all right, what's the next chapter now? And one of my former colleagues at Red Bull that had the same job as me essentially, she ended up working at this like audio advertising agency that made essentially jingles for companies. So it's all kind of coming full circle, weirdly enough. Like it took like 10 years, but we got there. And she was a project manager there, and that was my job too. So they needed more help, and she suggested me, and they just brought me on. Like had one interview and just like got the job immediately. So pretty like easy scenario where all the jobs I've gotten have just been like, hey, I know someone and they can vouch for you, and therefore here, take it. So I never really had to struggle that much with like interviewing for like months on end, which I'm really, really grateful for. I might have to do that scenario in a few months when my grad school program ends, but we'll get to that in a second. So then I worked at this agency called Listen, and what we did was we would, if you're like watching Netflix, right? Like the screen turns on, you see the big N, and you hear the da-dun, and then it kind of like leads you into the menu, right? And if you heard that sound in isolation, maybe not so much for Netflix, but like the kind of Apple gong sound when you turn the computer on, or if you're like watching HBO, like before HBO Max, there was the kind of audio logo that was like this TV static, like TV turns on, zzz, if you heard that, you'd be like, that's the HBO sound. Like you just knew that right away because you knew it was going to lead into like the Sopranos theme song or the Curb theme song or whatever. So just that. And so we would make these for companies. And we would also make product sounds for like apps, like UX sounds for apps. So like many apps have like custom little notification sounds or like interactions when you were or just talk, like, using it. So we would make those. And one of our projects that I really liked, I really liked the project, was we would do all the sounds for Ford's vehicles. So like every single sound that was in most of their cars, we designed. So like, the kind of like fasten your seatbelt sound, the like reverse sound, the turn signals. But one thing we were doing that I thought was really interesting was like, for electric cars, they don't produce any sound when they're accelerating, right? Like if you have a Tesla or something, you might recognize that the sound is like a sort of synthesized sound of like acceleration. And with Ford, which was really cool, was that like they had a bunch of different car lines that kind of appeal to different demographics, right? Like a truck might be like more like, masculine, manly, kind of like tough, built for tough, right? Whereas an electric sedan might be a bit more geared to like the family or like kind of like young professionals. And so we would kind of tune these like engine sounds differently depending on who usually drove the car. So for a truck, it might be like a bit more of like a grittier, like kind of sound. Like, no, not like that, but like, so engine synthesized, but had a bit more like electric guitar kind of qualities, distortion. Whereas for a sedan, it's more like sleek, like supposed to sound futuristic, right? And so like my job at this company was as a project manager. So it was a bit more of like administrative and logistical and kind of like being the main client communications guy. But I really liked seeing how our creative team worked and just thinking to myself like, man, I wish I was creative every day. Like my job is not really creative at all. Like I'm getting a little tired of just like being the guy that's like just writing emails all day and I want to be like doing stuff. And so I eventually started thinking about like what could I do in terms of a career change. And I, in the pandemic, in 2020, when all the clubs closed, I was like, well, music doesn't really feel like something that like makes sense to do at this time because like I make club music. If there's no environment to listen to it in, then I don't really feel super incentivized to make this. Not that I was only making it for people to play in clubs, but like I just kind of like lost interest in it temporarily. And I started discovering this kind of field called generative art or creative coding, where basically you're making art with code. And sometimes it's generative in the sense that it's like kind of randomized based on certain parameters you put in. But discovered this field, and there was this one person in particular, this guy Zach Lieberman, who is a guy that like is kind of a pioneer in this, and he developed this software called Open Frameworks. And basically, it was like a you're coding in certain kind of parameters, like make a triangle here, make a circle here, like make 10 circles here, and like make the opacities like 10% less every time. So like big circles, smaller. So you can like make these like really cool, interesting pieces of art by adding these kind of mathematical parameters. And through that, I discovered this other program called Touch Designer, which is like the thing I'm now obsessed with. And I've spent 5 years like learning intensely. Through that, somehow figured out that there's a school in New York that does a master's program in interactive art technology. Like, how can we make art more playful? How can we make it so that's not just a painting, but something that you physically interact with, and that changes the like art in some way? And I applied to it, and I got in. And the day I got in, I was like, "All right, y'all, you got 2 more months of me, and then I'm out. Like, I am done, and I'm going to grad school." And so that's what I've been doing for the past 2 years, and it's been super exciting.
That was a lot.
Yeah.
And I want to touch on a couple of things. The first thing that really stood out to me, so your parents are both doctors, right?
My mom is a computer scientist, and my dad's a biologist, basically.
Okay, because I was wondering in terms of the post-secondary that you went into for like studying the what's the exact
neuroscience?
Yeah, the neuroscience, but it's like the audio aspect of that, right?
I mean, there's no specific term really, but I guess it's like audiology is like the study of like how we hear things, but that wasn't really what I was interested in. It was more like just music psychology as a whole.
I was just curious if that was at all influenced by your parents.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
okay.
Like, my parents were, they're immigrants that came from Brazil. So like for them, and I have 2 sisters. Well, they're like half sisters, but my dad raised them essentially. So I kind of consider them like full sisters. and they went into like law school and medical school and like very traditional like ways of success that immigrant parents might be used to. So even though I was interested in music, that was never really an option for me because I was not like pressured, but like strongly influenced to go into something that would be making a lot of money, because I think for a lot of immigrant households, like the way, you move to a new country and like you just advance the ranks and do the American way, right? Like go to college, get a good job, make a ton of money, like have kids, have a happy life. That was never like really for me. And I always, I got diagnosed with ADHD when I was like 14. I always knew I was like a little bit different. And when I finally got diagnosed, I was like, see guys, I fucking told you. For like 5 years, I was like, something's wrong here. Like, oh, you're just not trying hard enough. Like, you're not getting good grades because you're not trying hard enough. And I knew that something was wrong. And then when I finally got diagnosed and then started going on medication and started getting good grades finally, I was like, see, I was trying. I just needed some extra like help via medication that I was taking. Because I was like not a great student. Not that I was like stupid, but I just like wasn't getting good grades because I couldn't like retain information that well. And so by the end of my high school, I had like 3.8 or 4.0. But in the beginning, it was like C student probably. And so music was like being good at that was like, all right, I'm finally good at something. Let me just try and dive into this. And so when they were like, no, you have to go into like academics, I was like, God damn it. So I chose neuroscience. I also was interested in it. Like I actually was, but like, I think I would have chosen something else if I had like total free reign to like do whatever I wanted.
Yeah, you kind of try to like fit the two things together where you're like, I'll do neuroscience, but I'll do it my way.
Right. Yeah.
And then, so like you said, obviously you decided at the end you wasn't for you. Mm-hmm. When did the DJing really, because like we sort of went through like a long timeline there, but we didn't get into like when that actually like popped off. Because you were making music since you were like before you were 10, basically.
Right.
You've always been building this thing up, but when did it really turn? Like, and then you're traveling to to Europe, obviously, like for your internships. But that's in the middle of school, so I know you came back and finished school. Like, when does it sort of take off? Where you're like, oh, like I'm getting people are asking me to come play things.
Right.
You mentioned a little bit where you were getting shows out of the city, but just go into that a little bit more.
Sure. Yeah. So basically, like I said, I started producing electronic music when I was like 17ish. It's kind of like ambiguous, but started making like club music, quote unquote, probably when I was like 19. And the first few things I did were just like, they were very, like, I listen back to them now, they're very like me, but they weren't very like playable by other people. But then I put out a track in 2011. It was the first track I ever like really publicly put out on a label. It was called Level 2. And it got like a premiere on this now defunct, well, I don't know if it's defunct, but like not as popular website called Accelerator. And at the time, Accelerator, like free downloads were like a lot of people found a lot of music. And had this nice little write-up. And I remember like my friend, Max Pearl, that worked for them, he basically arranged this kind of premiere and wrote up the article. And he sent me the link, and I was like walking home from school, and I was like, oh my God, like I have a track on Accelerator, this is crazy. And like nowadays, it's like, it was a blog that just like put up anything that a PR company would send them. But for me, it was like, this is my first exposure to like the world at large outside of my immediate community. And from there, people just started hitting me up like, hey, I really like your music. Like, do you want to do a release on our label? And I was like, yeah, sure. And just kind of said yes to everything. And then probably around like 2012 is like when I started getting asked to DJ in cities other than the one I currently lived in. So like probably one of the earliest times that I played outside the city was like my friend Nick Conklin booked me in Burlington because he went to UVM. And I played there probably like 2012, 2013. But first like international show, I played this warehouse party in Vancouver. Well, actually I played in London when I was there in 2012, but like first like real international show was in Vancouver, this DIY warehouse party that my friends that now go by Greasus kind of put on. And I remember it was like this, this like warehouse in Vancouver that was like kind of like dingy artist loft. Like someone definitely lived there, but it was like kind of, to my recollection, a mess. And I remember there was like one very specific funny memory of like, there's a bathroom there that had no door, and it was just like a toilet, like just a little like, corridor and then toilet, and then there's also a bathtub. And the line just got so long at some point, people just started like pissing in the bathtub too, like in plain view of everyone in line. And I'm like, wow, this is real. Like, it felt like really crusty, And at some point during my set, some girl flashed me, and I was like, whoa, this is the DJ life. This is sick. I'm like seeing boobs and playing cool music. Oh man, this is awesome. Funnily enough, there's actually a picture of that like instance where the girl's flashing me. It's like still on Facebook. Somehow the filters never caught it. So if you go really deep in my Facebook, you'll find a picture of some girl going in front of the decks. But yeah, probably around like 2012. So, like I've been traveling for DJing for the past like 13 years.
Yeah, and so you said, because obviously 2020, like a lot of stuff happened.
Yeah.
So everything that I think, if I'm reading this right, everything is going nicely, and then everything kind of stops. And like you said, you didn't like fall out of love with the music or anything, but you were just like, if this isn't even going to go anywhere, like what's your sort of, so you're back into it. I mean, I know we were talking.
I'm back into it now. I mean, the thing is like right now I'm in this program that I mentioned beforehand at NYU, and it's just like really intense, man. It's like I'm there probably 12 to 15 hours every single weekday.
You got back, I was here at like, what, 8, and you came back at 11, I think, or something?
Yeah.
And like, it kept moving where you're like, oh yeah, I'm still here, but like, don't worry, and then, because you're just going at it.
Yeah, and then, the thing is like with this program, like right now I'm in the very final stretch, and what we're doing is we're working on our thesis project. So it's like a 9-month long culmination of like everything you've learned and like one big project. Because usually the way the school works is like, you have like 5 classes a semester, and like every single week you're like delivering a mini project. So you're delivering constantly like this tiny little projects that you can like work on for a week. And so you never really have time to like really like invest in like make something really cool. It's like, it's a prototypey kind of stuff. And there's a bunch of stuff around my apartment, like this clock included, that like this was like a 2-month project. So that's like a bit more time to like have something that looks nice. I had more time to fabricate it, to like
it was cool to see the iterations of this, like because you post all this stuff, and so for me seeing the iterations of it and being like, okay, that's cool. And then I remember you had like the cells or whatever, but they weren't divided with like a blocker, so the light was spilling, and then you blocked them all off so that it's clean. Anyway, sorry, continue.
Yeah, no, but I mean, to your point, it's like the more time you have to spend with something, you can fix all these little issues that like arise these like week-long projects. And so my thesis project is like a 9-month project. It's due in 2 days from the recording of this. So, but I'm making good progress, and I'm like pretty confident I'll finish it by then. But like last night, for example, when I came back home late, I was I had to like go to the basement, like spray paint something, and then that just took longer than I thought. And then I got back up, and I was like packing up, and I was like, hold on, I can be more efficient here if I just like spend 20 minutes to like 3D model something and like send it to the 3D printer so I can get it tomorrow, rather than just doing this tomorrow afternoon. Like maybe just make a quick prototype and just see if this part fits. And so like I'd be like, oh yeah, I'm coming home at 10 p.m. And then I started working on it. I'm like, okay, 10:30. And then like I was like, crap, I have to like clean up my desk. All right, 10:45. And then I go downstairs, and it's like, oh, the subway is not running, so I have to like go to this other subway. It's like, all right, 11:30. So I mean, I was there from 10:30 to 11:30, so 13-hour day.
Tell us about the program, because you started a little bit where you're like, hey, you got into it's post-grad, right?
Yeah, it's a master's.
So you got into the master's, and you told your job, like, you got 2 months and I'm out of here.
Yeah.
How did you find it, the program, and then tell us about it.
Sure, yeah. How did I find it? That's a good question, actually. I don't know how I found it. I think that, like, some people at my job at the time it was like a company that was split into 2, one of which was this audio branding, and one of which was like making experiential activations, right? So like let's say Sephora wants to do an activation at like the airport or something that wants to use technology to like bring their sense to life. Like we basically like brainstorm and then kind of like produce and develop these physical pop-ups. And some people in my company like went to NYU, and I just like really liked what those people were doing, and I was like, what's the deal here, like with this program? And they tell me about it, and like, we learned a lot of skills that allow us to kind of like work in this field of like making cool stuff with technology. And I just always really liked that a bit more than the audio branding personally. Like I kind of kept asking to be on projects that were like doing these kind of like cool techie activations. And so I discovered it that way. But then when I got in, I mean, listen, I came into this thing with like no experience whatsoever in physically building something with my hands. Barely any experience with coding. I mean, I knew Touch Designer, but like not like JavaScript or Python, it was like node-based stuff. Came in with no experience of like just like very little like graphic design, visual art experience. So like through the courses that I did, of which like, in your intro semester, you have like 5 courses that everyone has to do. And it's like intro to physical computing, which is basically like how do we use little like small computers called Arduinos to control various things like gears, motors, lights, etc. And it's like electrical engineering, like basics essentially. There's like that. There's like hypercinema, which is like how do we use things like Unreal Engine to do like storytelling? You know, like how do you use After Effects? Like things that are just like time-based media. Intro to computational media, which is basically like using this program called P5.js, which is an adapted version of JavaScript that's meant for like making graphic art. So it's like all like just standard, like what you like see in the movies, like coding of just like text in a screen, but then like you hit enter and that creates some animation, right? And then PComp, Hypercinema, ICM. What am I forgetting here? Like visual languages, like graphic design basics. There's one more I'm forgetting, but there's kind of like overall like survey course called Applications, which is like what's going on in the kind of like new media landscape. But then like as you go on, you get like more specialized, right? So for my purposes, I really wanted to go into like projects that used music and lights. So I got into things like, why am I blanking on these names right now? Like I just did this last year. We've done a lot in this program, so you forget some things over time. They'd be like, oh yeah, the code of music. Like how do you create music exclusively with code and without like actually like drawing that stuff in like Ableton. So that was really interesting challenges of like, and that like allowed me to kind of think about making music in new ways and think about like, all right, I can make like a polyrhythm by like having this line of code looping 7 times over another line of code looping 4 times, right? So it's making like a 7/4 kind of pattern. And so like just thinking about things like in these like numerical ways versus these kind of like visual ways of drawing stuff in the program was like kind of interesting. And I took another class called Big LEDs, which is about like, yeah, how do we like wire up and like program LED structures, and took another class called Time, which is like a bit more abstract, just like what is time and how has it existed throughout, all of human history, and like how do we think about it. And so our final project was like making a clock of some variety. So I made this thing, which is the clock that displays the time, hours, minutes, seconds, and when it's dark enough, you can kind of see that all these lights kind of meet in the middle. So it creates this illusion of like the hands of the clock being made of light.
On the camera, it actually looks really good. Like,
okay.
It looks actually how you can imagine it.
Amazing. Yeah, and it was the kind of thing where basically inside of there's an Arduino that is connected to my Wi-Fi, and it's pulling the time from like the national time database, like time.gov. And so it's basically saying, all right, if it's, this is off by 2 hours because I haven't reprogrammed it to account for the daylight savings. I just kind of like didn't think about that. So, you can't get it right always in the first time. But right now is probably 12:31, which, yep, it is. And yeah, this is like fabricated with like a bunch of layers of like laser cut acrylic. So it feels really heavy duty and nice. And yeah, something I was really proud of. Yeah, so I really like making just like physical things. Like I said, I came into this without any building experience, and the act of building something concrete is so much more rewarding than like making a track. Like making a digital file, because it's like I built this with my own damn hands. Like there's something really satisfying about that. So I really like doing that. A little off camera, there's another thing over here that's like a turntable looking thing, and I'll send you the footage of this later. Turntable that like basically as you put these little colored LED candles on it, it acts as like a 16-step musical step sequencer. So normally in a step sequencer, you'll have like 16 steps going this way, right? So if you put like a beat like here, 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 and here, it'd be like doo, 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 doo. Now imagine if you like took that and you kind of like wrapped it around a circle. So if you had a beat here, 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 and here, it goes doo, 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 doo. So as you put these little like colored LED pucks on it, they're different sounds, right? So like red might be a kick drum, yellow might be a snare drum, blue might be a hi-hat. You kind of arrange them in order, and then there's these color sensors that like look down and analyze like, all right, what's passing by? Is it yellow? If it's yellow, then send the snare drum. Or, in the other categories, like if it's green, it's the note C for the bass or whatever. But yeah, it's like a heavy duty like turntable looking thing. It's kind of an abstract instrument. which I really like, and which is kind of like what I'm making right now with my thesis project, which is basically it's an interface for like non-musicians to be able to play beautiful melodies instantly without any musical knowledge and get inspired to play music. And so that's what I've been kind of grinding on for the past 9 months, and it's so close to being done. And I'm like, honestly, I'm kind of like, people like getting pregnant and having children, like this is what it's like. Like, oh my God, so long. I've been working on this for what feels like a lifetime.
What do you, because you've done so much already, and like a lot of stuff that a lot of people would aspire to, frankly. So you have great perspective on a lot of different things. And I'm curious, like, so you're almost done. You like, is this the last week? Like, you're gonna finish everything and then you've got some more? Okay.
It's the last week of having to work on this project because basically, like, beginning of May, I need to do a presentation to like the entire school. And it's like live streamed to the public. That's like the final thing I have to do for school. And then after that, I graduate. But before then, I have to do a kind of like an internal version of that. And on Thursday, I have to like get documented like nice kind of like high quality product pictures and videos. So that's kind of like, it needs to be physically built by then. But then over the course of the next week, I got to like develop this like 10-minute presentation and talk about it and like show the entire progress, like every iteration. I've made like 15 different versions of this thing in different kind of like fashions, right? Beforehand, it was like projector shooting interface onto a table. And so if you put your hands over this, I didn't even explain it, but like basically the way it works is that there's basically like 8 circles arranged in a half circle, like little pucks of acrylic. And there's a camera that's like kind of mounted above it looking downwards. And if you put your hands kind of floating above one of these circles, the camera tracks your hand and it makes a skeleton of your hand. And it identifies this specific point, which I've just hard coded in to be like, tip of your index finger. If that's over one of these circles, it plays a note. And there's 8 circles, there's 8 notes in a scale. So like C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. And so as you're playing that, you're gonna play these different notes. And then there's a panel on the left that like you can change things like what's the instrument that's being used? Is it piano, woodwind, strings, mallets? What scale are you in? Like major, minor, other stuff. Are you playing a single note or playing chords? Are you playing a single note or playing an arpeggio, like kind of sequence of notes? And so, the act of like hovering over it is a sort of unconventional technique it kind of feels like you're playing like air piano basically. And the idea is that I want to be able to give anyone the ability to play good and interesting music, because if you put, a grand piano in front of a 5-year-old, I've used this example a million times, but I'm going to stick with it. You give a 5-year-old a grand piano, right? What are they going to do at first? It's going to sound, bah, 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 bah. And that is not going to give them any sort of indication that making music is fun. They're going to be like, this sounds like crap. Like, I do not like this. I'm not going to learn this, right? But if you gave them a piano where them doing this created some like beautiful like Beethoven like symphony, they'd be like, wow, making music's really fun, and I really enjoy this, and I enjoy this feeling of making good sounding music. And that's a goal to like aspire to, right? So then you got to be like, listen, it's not going to be like that immediately if you like learn piano or guitar, but it can be like that. You just got to like struggle through the early sections, but like it gives you that goal in mind that allows you to like be more inspired to play an instrument. Because if you're like playing a video game, you're not going to start off level 1 with a boss fight. You're going to start off with the easy, like, jump over the Koopa or like hit the coin or whatever. And it gets progressively harder, right? So if you let them know, like, from the onset, like, here's the thing you kind of could do. Like, okay, if you started a video game with a boss fight where, like, you were supercharged and you just, like, knocked him out in one hit, you're like, oh, that felt amazing. And it's like, right, in order to get this, you're going to have to do this stuff. You're going to, like, want to do all those steps because you love that feeling of being supercharged so much, right? So yeah, basically like with this thesis project, it's due in a few days, and I forget exactly what the question you asked me originally was.
Well, just so what I was, because I was going into something, so I was more just saying like, you're done, but you're close to being done.
Very close.
But my question really was like, so what do you want to do with this? Or like, what do you want to do? But I'm assuming you want to do something with this, because I can tell like just seeing over the last couple of years, you just post everything, and like there's like this real joy of you like creating stuff.
Love it. It's like, I love making music, but like I really love the interactive art stuff, and like there's just like I did a project last year where I basically made this pumpkin that has this kind of like sensor in it that like it's like a little like pumpkin you can buy from CVS, like a plastic pumpkin that you get for Halloween, and I basically like drilled some holes for like a face, and there's like basically LEDs that in the eyes and mouth. It's very expressive. It's like almost like a real like little Tamagotchi kind of thing. And as you get close to it, there's a sensor in the nose that like it moves farther away and gets scared. And if you get too close, it kind of like lunges at you. And I remember the first time this thing turned on and like worked, I've never experienced that kind of ecstasy in my life. Like it was the happiest I've ever been. Just like turning it on, seeing the eyes light up, and then being like, and watching it move backwards. I was like, I just created life. I just like birthed this thing through just like pure willpower and ingenuity. And like the struggle getting to that point, like so many like, you know, like misfires, like, yeah, I guess like a mislaunch, like for like shooting a spacecraft or whatever, where like it almost worked and it didn't. So the time it did work, it was just like, oh my God, finally. And like, I've never had that with music. Like there's been many moments where I've been like, you know, making a track like, man, that sounds great, you know, but not that like, oh my God, I just did that kind of moment. And like, even with like, I've played like, you know, hundreds of shows at this point. I've played to like upwards of like 15,000 people at once. And like, yeah, seeing people like get down to music that you're playing, or especially if I'm playing a track that I've made and people are responding well, like that's great, obviously, but like nothing compares to me alone at like midnight at the studio watching this pumpkin come to life, you know? Like, so that is the kind of thing where I'm like, okay, this is something truly that I'm like actually in love with. And music I love, but I'm in love with this thing, which is there's a distinction there.
So what do you want to do? What do you want to do with it?
I would like to, well, do many things. One big one is I really like teaching. I really like showing people how these softwares work, because I learn exclusively from YouTube University, basically, right? I watch a tutorial every single day in 2020, and I would execute that. And some people have better teaching styles than others, and I want to just like try and find a way that I can explain these concepts in a way that like anyone can get it. And also just like, I really enjoy watching people grow and develop in their craft, you know, like in the same way that like when I started, I didn't know anything, and now I know like quite a bit about this one niche software. But the ability to kind of like create anything I want now because of the connections I made in my brain, which is indebted to those teachers that like helped explain these concepts, right? So like I really want to like enable people to get that. Also just like want to do like freelance kind of like creative technologist consulting, you know, like I really like when people come to me with like a problem, like I really like helping them solve problems. So that's kind of like pseudo creative director kind of position, which is like, all right, but have you considered this? Like what how could this evolve? You know, like I really like that kind of thing. It's like a mixture of teaching, freelance consulting, just like being an individual artist that's making things like be shown in the gallery. Still doing the DJ production because it's like still the moneymaker at this point. But having basically like 5 mini jobs is the way my brain works more so than having one 40-hour-a-week day job. But yeah, I mean, just seeing where I can push it. Like I said, like throughout most of these past 2 years, I've had like a week at a time to work on things. And I really like this experience of having 9 months to work on one big thing. And like the product design element of it, I really enjoy too. Like I'm not really a designer, but like I really like the things that I make, you know, like all the things I make are somewhat similar to this. It's kind of like sleek black acrylic with these kind of like little inlays of like silver and white, like this aesthetic or style I really enjoy. So like seeing where I can push that. And as I get hip to new like techniques like 3D printing or like resin casting or something, just like seeing what kinds of things I can make, because like I said, making stuff with my hands is the most rewarding thing possible.
That's awesome. We're basically coming to the end, but I always like to finish up just asking people what they would say to the world. Like you got a platform right now, and like you've already said a lot of great stuff. Mm-hmm. But what would you want the world to know? Like what would you want to tell people?
That's a good question. I might need a second to think about this.
That's okay.
All right, one thing I say to the world is that shit's rough out there right now. If you want to do something in your life, if you want to make a change, now's the time to do it, because I don't know how much time we have left longer on this planet. Things like climate change, various kind of like political ongoings that are like, in my opinion, not great right now. You know, I don't know when shit's going to come to an end. So live life to the fullest and do whatever you want right now, because you only have one life. Enjoy it.
Andre, thanks a lot for talking to me, man.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.
Yeah. Make sure you get the handshake on camera.
You know? Of course.